The year 2461 marked humanity's first contact with the Galactic Alliance, a vast coalition of alien species that had dominated the stars for thousands of years. At first, it seemed like a golden age was upon Earth. Trade deals were established, technology was exchanged, and humanity marveled at the wonders of an interstellar civilization. But the illusion of peace shattered and the Alliance revealed its true colors. Humans, despite their intelligence, were deemed an anomaly, an unpredictable wildcard in an otherwise orderly galactic hierarchy. They expanded too aggressively, fought too fiercely, and most of all, refused to bend the knee to the Alliance's rigid rule. The tipping point came when the United Terran Systems, UTS, refused to sign the Stability Accord, an agreement that would have stripped Earth of its sovereignty and placed human colonies under direct Alliance control. The response was swift and brutal. In the opening salvo of what would be known as the Extermination Campaign, the Galactic Alliance launched a preemptive strike, targeting Earth's outermost colonies. Over 20 human worlds fell within the first week, entire populations wiped out or enslaved. The Alliance expected humanity to surrender after such overwhelming losses. They were wrong. On board the UTS Dreadnought Resolute, Admiral Elias Mercer stared at the holographic display before him. Red markers swarmed across the star map, each one representing an enemy fleet tightening the noose around humanity's remaining strongholds. His grim expression revealed the truth: Earth and its allies were outnumbered nearly 100 to 1. A low whistle came from his second-in-command, Commander Sarah Ibarra. "I don't suppose they're here to negotiate?" she asked dryly, arms crossed. Mercer let out a humorless chuckle. "Oh, they're negotiating, all right. Terms of our extinction." The War Council had been gathered aboard Resolute, the flagship of what remained of humanity's once proud navy. Generals, admirals, and representatives of surviving colonies stood around the holotable, their faces illuminated by its cold blue light. "We can't hold against those numbers," Admiral Rees-Voss said, shaking his head. "They'll crush our defenses and glass Earth within a month if we don't act now." "Then we act first," Mercer replied. His voice was calm but carried the weight of command. "The Alliance thinks we'll play by their rules, that we'll fight head-on like all the other species they've conquered. We won't. We fight dirty. We fight smart. We fight like humans." A murmur rippled through the room. It was true, humanity's history was drenched in warfare, but it was also filled with innovation, resilience, and defiance against overwhelming odds. The Alliance fought with numbers, overwhelming firepower, and predictable tactics. Humanity had something else. Mercer turned to Colonel Aidan Graves, commander of the UTS Black Hand, the elite Special Forces Division. "Colonel, what's the status of Operation Eclipse?" Graves grinned, the scar on his cheek pulling slightly. "We're ready to deploy. Our infiltration teams are standing by to strike their supply lines and command centers. If we hit them where it hurts, we can slow their advance long enough to turn the tide." A representative from Mars, Governor Evelyn Hahn, leaned forward. "You're talking about guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale." "Yes," Mercer said firmly. "Hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, cyber warfare, whatever it takes. If they think we'll fight fair, they're in for a rude awakening." Commander Ibarra smirked. "We can't match their numbers, but they can't match our sheer stubbornness." The decision was made. 1 week later, the first major blow was struck. Deep within the Arcanes Nebula, a massive Alliance logistics hub floated, its towering spires housing millions of tons of fuel, ammunition, and supplies. It was the lifeline of the enemy's advancing fleet. The Alliance had left it lightly guarded, confident that humanity wouldn't dare strike so deep into their space. They were wrong. A handful of human stealth ships slipped past enemy patrols, deploying teams of Black Hand operatives onto the station. Within minutes, explosives were set, systems were sabotaged, and chaos erupted. The attack was swift and devastating. A dozen enemy ships were obliterated in the resulting chain reaction. Supplies meant to sustain the Alliance war machine for months were reduced to burning debris. The message was clear: humanity would not go quietly. As the enemy scrambled to respond, Admiral Mercer watched from his bridge, arms crossed as he observed the flaming wreckage through the viewport. "The first punch is ours," he muttered. "Let's make sure the last one is, too." The war had begun in earnest. The destruction of the Arcani's nebula supply hub sent shockwaves through the Galactic Alliance. Never before had an inferior species dared to strike so deep into their territory, let alone inflict such damage. It was not just an act of defiance, it was an act of war. On board the Resolute, Admiral Elias Mercer analyzed the latest intelligence reports. The Alliance had responded exactly as he predicted, scrambling to reinforce their supply lines and reallocating fleets to defend their logistics hubs. They were shifting to a defensive posture, expecting more precision strikes. Good. That meant they were scared. Standing beside him, Commander Sarah Ibarra scanned the same reports, her lips curling into a smirk. They're panicking. Their whole war machine depends on predictability, on control. The fact that we're not playing by their rules has them stumbling. Mercer nodded. But they're not stupid. They'll adapt. That means we have to keep pushing before they do. A holographic projection of Colonel Aidan Graves flickered to life. His teams had returned from the successful Arcani's raid, and he looked eager for the next fight. "Admiral, I assume you have another target lined up?" Mercer zoomed in on a planet near the border of Alliance space, **Vakar Prime**, a critical military outpost. It was heavily fortified, unlike Arcani's, but taking it would send an even stronger message. "We go for the throat this time," Mercer said. "This isn't just about striking supply lines anymore. We need a foothold. A planet to stage our operations from." Ibarra raised an eyebrow. "Taking an enemy stronghold with our numbers? Ballsy." Graves grinned. "I like it." The War Council agreed. Humanity had no choice but to fight with overwhelming aggression. Their best chance of survival was to keep the enemy off balance, striking them where they least expected it. 3 days later, the assault on Vakar Prime began. The plan was simple: a feint, a drop, and a detonation. The UTS fleet, small but fast, would engage the orbital defenses, drawing enemy fire and forcing reinforcements to deploy. Meanwhile, Black Hand operatives and shock troops would land undetected and sabotage planetary defenses from within. Once the chaos reached its peak, the main ground forces would drop in, delivering the killing blow. As the Resolute and its fleet emerged from slip space, alarms blared across Vakar Prime's orbit. The planet's defense grid, an array of heavy rail cannons and laser platforms, powered up and opened fire. "Evasive maneuvers," Mercer barked. The Resolute shook violently as enemy fire grazed its shields. Meanwhile, under the cover of the battle, 36 stealth dropships slipped through the chaos, weaving between explosions and debris. On the ground, the infiltration teams moved swiftly, disguised as civilian workers. The first phase of the plan was in motion, hijacking the planetary comms array, ***. Graves led a strike team through the labyrinthine corridors of the main command center, silencing enemy patrols along the way. A single well-placed virus was injected into the system, and within seconds, Alliance ships and ground forces were receiving false orders, sowing confusion across their ranks. That was the moment Mercer had been waiting for. "All units, execute Phase 2, he ordered. The sky above Vakar Prime ignited as drop pods rained down, slamming into the battlefield like meteorites. Humanity's forces surged forward, engaging enemy defenses before they could recover. Alliance commanders were accustomed to structured warfare, but the humans fought with unpredictable brutality, snipers picking off officers, explosives placed in narrow choke points, mechs charging through barricades with reckless abandon, By the time the Alliance realized what had happened, it was too late. A final strike from the Resolute obliterated the remaining orbital defenses, and the human flag was raised over Vakar Prime. Humanity had taken its first world. But the Alliance was far from defeated. The fall of Vakar Prime sent shockwaves through the Galactic Alliance. It was more than just the loss of a strategic world, it was a humiliation. Humanity, a species that should have been easily crushed, had not only struck deep into enemy space but had taken a heavily fortified planet and turned it into a war front. But victory always came at a cost. Inside the command center of the captured stronghold, Admiral Elias Mercer leaned over a holographic map, studying the latest intelligence. The planet was theirs, but holding it was a different battle entirely. Commander Sarah Ibarra stood beside him, her expression grim. Alliance reinforcements are already en route. We intercepted communications, 3 fleets are gathering at the nearest system. We have days, maybe less, before they come back in force. Across the room, Colonel Aidan Graves patched up a wound on his arm, still grinning despite the pain. Let them come. We'll make them bleed for every inch. Mercer exhaled, considering their options. They had outmaneuvered the enemy before, but now they were entrenched. A prolonged siege was not in humanity's favor. The enemy could throw wave after wave at them, and eventually, sheer numbers would win out. We can't hold this planet forever, Mercer admitted. Not with the forces we have. Ibarra gave him a sharp look. Then why the hell did we take it? Mercer smirked. Because we're not keeping it, we're using it. The room fell silent as his officers exchanged glances. Mercer tapped a point on the holomap. Vakar Prime isn't just a military hub. It's a major communication relay for the entire sector. That means we can intercept and manipulate Alliance transmissions. Ibarra's eyes widened with realization. We can feed them false intelligence. Exactly, Mercer confirmed. We're going to make the enemy chase ghosts while we hit them where it hurts. Graves chuckled. So we don't defend the planet, we turn it into a giant trap. Mercer nodded. We mine the entire surface, overload the reactors, and when they finally think they've reclaimed their precious world. Ibarra finished his thought, a grin forming. Boom. As soon as the plan was set in motion, human engineers and demolition teams worked around the clock. High-energy explosives were embedded deep in the infrastructure, planetary shields were sabotaged to collapse at the right moment, and false data streams were sent to the enemy, leading them to believe humanity was reinforcing Vakar Prime instead of preparing to abandon it. Meanwhile, resistance on the ground was fierce. The Alliance had left stranded forces during the invasion, and they were launching desperate guerrilla strikes against the human occupation. In the ruins of a bombed-out city, a squad of UTS soldiers patrolled cautiously, their visors scanning the debris for signs of movement. This place gives me the creeps, muttered Corporal Lien Park, her grip tightening on her rifle. Stay sharp, Sergeant Travis Kane warned. They're still out there. As if on cue, a plasma bolt sizzled through the air, taking down the soldier beside him. Ambush. Alliance shock troopers emerged from the rubble, their armor reflecting the crimson light of Vakar Prime's twin suns. Gunfire and plasma fire tore through the streets as both sides clashed in brutal, close-quarters combat. Despite their injuries and dwindling supplies, the human soldiers fought like demons, refusing to give an inch. This was their world now, and they would not go quietly. By the time reinforcements arrived, the enemy ambush had been repelled, but at a heavy cost. The wounded outnumbered the dead, and medical supplies were running low. Back at the command center, Mercer received the casualty reports with a clenched jaw. He knew every soldier who fell here was another reminder of the thin line humanity was walking. They couldn't afford a war of attrition. They had to strike the killing blow before the Alliance could regroup. As the first enemy fleet arrived in orbit, an Alliance admiral sneered at the desolate landscape below. His forces outnumbered the humans 20-1, it should have been an easy victory. Orders were given. Drop ships descended. Troops landed in force. Then, at the exact moment Mercer had planned, the trap was sprung. The entire planet erupted in fire. Shockwaves tore through enemy formations, shipyards collapsed, entire regiments were obliterated in a heartbeat. The flagship carrying the sector's commanding officers was caught in the chain reaction, disintegrating in a brilliant explosion. The remaining Alliance forces panicked, their battle coordination collapsing without leadership. Meanwhile, the UTS fleet slipped away under the cover of the chaos, vanishing into deep space. As Vakar Prime's surface burned, Mercer watched from the bridge of the Resolute, his face expressionless. "They'll never underestimate us again," Ibarra said quietly. Mercer's grip tightened on the railing. "No, they won't. And now we take the war to them." The war was far from over. But for the first time, humanity had the advantage. The destruction of Vakar Prime was a catastrophe for the Galactic Alliance. What should have been a swift and overwhelming reclamation had turned into a massacre of their own forces. Hundreds of thousands of troops were lost, entire battle groups obliterated. The loss of such a crucial communication hub sent their entire military strategy into disarray. Humanity had done the impossible. And now, the Alliance wanted revenge. On board the Resolute, Admiral Elias Mercer stood in the war room, watching new enemy movements flicker across the holomap. The Alliance wasn't retreating. If anything, they were doubling down. "They've shifted to full war production," Commander Sarah Ibarra said grimly. "They're deploying entire sector fleets to hunt us down." Mercer exhaled through his nose. He had expected retaliation, but the sheer scale of the enemy's response was staggering. 7 battle fleets. Over 200 capital ships. Thousands of support vessels, ***. All of it aimed at wiping humanity from existence. "We stirred the hornet's nest," Colonel Aidan Graves muttered. "They're throwing everything at us." Mercer nodded. "Good. That means they're not thinking straight. If they're committing this much to hunting us, that means they're leaving other territories exposed." Governor Evelyn Hahn, representing the surviving colonies, leaned forward. "You're suggesting we counterattack? We barely escaped Vakar Prime. Our forces are scattered." Mercer turned to the room. "We can't outrun them forever. And we can't win a prolonged war. But if we hit where they least expect it, we can force them to rethink their strategy." He tapped a point on the map, Zenith Forge. The largest shipyard in the sector. If humanity couldn't match the Alliance fleet for fleet, they could cripple their ability to build new ships. Ibarra's eyes widened. "You're insane. That's a core military facility." Graves grinned. "I love it." Mercer's voice was calm, but firm. "If we pull this off, they won't just be licking their wounds. They'll be bleeding out." The decision was made. The assault on Zenith Forge had to be perfect. There would be no second chance. The plan relied on deception. Using stolen access codes from Vakar Prime, the Resolute and a handful of warships disguised their energy signatures to resemble an Alliance patrol fleet. Meanwhile, stealth corvettes moved ahead, planting explosives along the shipyard's structural weak points. As they approached the forge, Ibarra sat on the bridge, arms crossed. "If they scan us too deep, we're screwed." Mercer kept his expression neutral. "Then let's not give them a reason to look too closely." The ruse worked. The station's automated defenses did not immediately react, believing them to be an expected fleet. Right up until the first explosions ripped through the shipyard's infrastructure. Mercer didn't wait for the enemy to react. "All ships, ***, attack, ***. The Resolute opened fire, its railguns and plasma batteries tearing through the station's outer defenses, fighter squadrons deployed, strafing the shipyard's docking bays before enemy craft could launch. Inside the station, Black Hand operatives stormed through hallways, planting high-yield charges along reactor cores and fuel depots. Alarms screamed. Alliance warships scrambled to respond. But humanity was already in their backyard. Zenith Forge burned. Massive explosions ruptured ship construction lines. Half-built dreadnoughts collapsed, torn apart by their own sabotaged reactors. The enemy's ability to mass-produce warships had been crippled in a single night. But victory came with a price. As the UTS forces retreated, the Alliance finally managed to rally a response. A battlecruiser group intercepted the fleet. Mercer's forces were outnumbered 6-1. The space around Zenith Forge became a maelstrom of fire and destruction. The Resolute took direct hits, shields buckling. Ibarra shouted over the alarms, "We're not going to make it out." Mercer's mind raced. They needed an escape route. That's when Colonel Graves, still aboard the burning shipyard, sent a final transmission. "I'll buy you time." "Graves, stand down," Mercer started, but the colonel had already hacked into the station's reactor core. A final grin. "Give them hell for me, Admiral." Then he detonated the entire shipyard. The resulting explosion obliterated the pursuing battlecruisers and threw the battlefield into chaos. The remaining UTS ships jumped to slipspace, escaping into the void. Back aboard the Resolute, silence filled the bridge. They had won. But at a cost. Mercer closed his eyes, taking a steadying breath. Graves had known what was at stake. He had made sure humanity lived to fight another day. Ibarra clenched her fists. "We keep going," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Mercer nodded. "We make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. The war wasn't over. But humanity was no longer just surviving. Now, they were winning." The destruction of Zenith Forge left the Galactic Alliance in disarray. Their war machine, designed for overwhelming dominance, had never suffered such devastating sabotage. Hundreds of ships, some completed, others still in construction, were lost in the inferno. More importantly, their ability to replenish their fleet had been crippled. But humanity had no time to celebrate. The Alliance, humiliated and desperate, was preparing to strike back harder than ever. Inside the dimly lit war room of the Resolute, Admiral Elias Mercer studied the new intelligence reports. The aftermath of Zenith Forge had forced the enemy to restructure their entire war strategy. "They're done playing defense," Commander Sarah Ibarra muttered. "They're about to throw everything they have at us." Mercer tapped the holomap, zooming in on Terrace V, a mid-sized moon in a neighboring system. "Their only surviving colony. They're going after the civilians next," he said. Ibarra's jaw tightened. "We always knew they'd make this personal." Governor Evelyn Hahn, speaking for the surviving human colonies, appeared on the hololink. "We've begun evacuations, but we don't have enough ships. If the Alliance arrives in full force, it'll be a slaughter." Silence filled the room. Colonel Graves' sacrifice had given them a strategic edge, but it had also enraged the enemy. The Alliance would not stop until they had exterminated humanity. Mercer clenched his fists. He had spent his entire career in calculated warfare, but now the enemy was targeting families, civilians, children. The Alliance wanted a decisive, brutal strike, to show that humanity's victories were meaningless. Mercer had no intention of letting that happen. ####The Battle of Terrace V. With only days before the enemy's assault, Mercer and his team formulated a desperate plan. Their fleet was outnumbered, and there were too many civilians to evacuate in time. The only chance they had was to even the playing field before the battle began. Ibarra smirked as she reviewed Mercer's plan. "You want to turn the whole moon into a giant trap?" Mercer gave a grim nod. "We lure them into the gravity well and hit them with everything we've got." The plan was risky. If the Alliance realized the deception too soon, they could pull back and bombard the planet from orbit. But if Mercer timed it right, they could cripple another fleet. As expected, the Alliance arrived in overwhelming force. The first and third battle fleets, over 500 warships, dropped out of slipspace. At their center was the Omen, a Leviathan-class dreadnought, one of the largest warships in the galaxy. The Resolute and the remaining UTS fleet stood in defiance, a tiny force compared to the overwhelming firepower before them. On the bridge of the Omen, Admiral Zalvori, a decorated officer of the Galactic Alliance, watched the human fleet with contempt. "This ends today," he growled. "Commence bombardment." But as the first plasma lances streaked toward Terrace V, nothing happened. Zalvori's second-in-command looked up, confused. "Sir, the weapons aren't responding." Aboard the Resolute, Ibarra grinned. Looks like they fell for it. Mercer had coordinated the sabotage weeks in advance, using Black Hand infiltrators posing as slave labor on an Alliance refueling station. They had hacked the targeting systems of key ships, scrambling their weapons and sensor arrays. Now, half of the Alliance fleet was blind. Then, Mercer gave the order. Now! On the surface of Terrace V, massive electromagnetic pulse charges detonated, disabling nearby enemy ships caught in low orbit. At the same time, human forces detonated hidden fusion mines in the asteroid belt, sending a wave of debris and shrapnel crashing into the fleet. In an instant, the hunters became the hunted. #### the turning point. Panic spread through the enemy ranks. The Alliance warships struggled to regain control as their own wreckage crashed into their formations. Then, humanity attacked. The UTS fleet, small, agile, and fighting like demons, *** sliced through the disoriented enemy forces ***, striking at key weak points before retreating into the cover of the debris field. Sniper frigates tore through the exposed reactors of disabled cruisers. Boarding teams hijacked disoriented battleships, turning them against their own fleet. One by one, Alliance warships were picked apart. The Omen tried to rally the remaining forces, but Mercer had one final move left. The Resolute and its remaining warships charged straight at the Dreadnought. "Concentrate all firepower," Mercer ordered. Plasma rounds, railgun slugs, and torpedoes hammered the Omen's shields, overwhelming them. The behemoth lurched, its engines failing. Inside the flagship, Admiral Zalvori stared in horror as his ship's systems collapsed around him. "This is impossible." A final torpedo strike from the Resolute tore through the Omen's command center. The Dreadnought split in half, consumed in a fiery explosion. ###, a victory at a cost. As the remaining Alliance forces retreated, the battlefield fell silent. Terrace V had been saved. But it had come at a price. Hundreds of human pilots and soldiers had given their lives to secure this victory. Some of the evacuation transports had been hit before they could escape, and the wreckage of fallen ships littered the skies. Mercer watched the ruined battlefield from the bridge, his hands clenched behind his back. "They'll come back," Ibarra said. "They always do." Mercer nodded. "But now, we're more than just survivors." He turned to his officers. "We're the ones making them run." The war wasn't over. But for the first time, humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory. The destruction of the Omen and the rout at Terrace V had shattered the Galactic Alliance's confidence. For the first time in recorded history, an enemy had forced them into retreat. What had started as a campaign of extermination had turned into a war of desperation. The Alliance High Command was now split. Some factions pushed for all-out planetary bombardment, ***, scorched Earth, no survivors ***, while others, those who still clung to the illusion of their superiority, believed humanity could still be crushed through conventional means. But one thing was certain, humanity was no longer just a problem. They were a threat. And threats had to be eliminated. Humanity's next move. Aboard the Resolute, Admiral Elias Mercer and his war council studied the latest enemy movements. Despite their losses, the Alliance still outnumbered humanity by thousands of warships. But Mercer wasn't looking at their fleet. He was looking at their supply lines. "They're stretched too thin," he muttered, tracing the major trade and military lanes across the holomap. They weren't prepared for a war like this. Their economy isn't built for prolonged conflict. Commander Sarah Ibarra leaned in, intrigued. "You're saying we don't hit their fleet, we hit their infrastructure?" Mercer nodded. "Cut off their fuel, their weapons, their food supplies, and they'll tear themselves apart." Governor Evelyn Hahn, still recovering from the losses at Terrace V, frowned. "And what happens if they decide to retaliate by glassing another colony?" Mercer exhaled. He knew the risk. The Alliance had shown no mercy when humanity was on the back foot. If they were cornered, they might resort to even more extreme measures. But he also knew this war had one endgame. Either humanity won, or they were wiped out. Ibarra, prepare the fleet. We move within the hour. Their target? The Lifeblood Corridor. The single most important supply chain in the entire Galactic Alliance. If it fell, the war would be changed forever. Operation Guillotine. The Lifeblood Corridor was a massive network of fuel refineries, resource depots, and cargo convoys stretching across multiple systems. The Alliance had never needed to defend it before. No one had ever dared attack. But humanity was different. The UTS fleet arrived in waves, using stealth ships to slip past outer defenses before striking the convoys with brutal precision. Supply freighters were ambushed and destroyed, leaving entire fleets stranded without fuel. Refinery stations were hacked and sabotaged, turning automated defenses against their own forces. Elite human operatives infiltrated cargo depots, planting high-yield explosives before vanishing into the void. Within days, the entire sector was in chaos. Admiral Zalvori's replacement, Grand Strategist Tarek Voss, was forced to divert entire battle groups just to defend supply lines, leaving key Alliance sectors exposed. Desperation and betrayal. The Alliance was unraveling. Without a steady flow of resources, frontline fleets ground to a halt. Troops went without proper supplies. Entire colonies, long dependent on the military's protection, found themselves vulnerable to piracy and rebellion. And then, the first cracks of internal conflict appeared. On the core world of Drazenthal, an industrial powerhouse responsible for shipbuilding, planetary governors began questioning High Command's decisions. "We were promised an easy war," one governor spat in a transmission intercepted by UTS spies. "Now we've lost 2 major fleets, half our refueling stations are gone, and we're rationing fuel like beggars." Some Alliance officers, realizing the war was no longer going in their favor, began defecting. It started with small things, convoys mysteriously disappearing supply requests being delayed or ignored. Then entire squadrons went silent, refusing to answer High Command's calls. The illusion of invincibility had been shattered. And Mercer knew it. The Grand Trap. With the Alliance in disarray, Mercer prepared his most daring move yet. A false transmission, mimicking Alliance distress signals, was sent out from a remote system. It claimed a massive UTS fleet had overextended itself, leaving it vulnerable to attack. Grand Strategist Tarek Voss, eager to prove humanity was still outmatched, took the bait. He assembled every remaining warship at his disposal, over 800 vessels, and moved to crush the trapped human fleet. But when the Alliance Armada arrived, they found nothing. No stranded ships. No desperate human fleet. Just a vast, empty system, surrounded by asteroid belts and dead planets. And then, from the darkness, Mercer's fleet emerged. They had never been trapped. They had been waiting. Hidden among the asteroid fields, using newly developed stealth technology, the human fleet sprang the trap. A devastating EMP pulse rippled through space, frying enemy sensors and shields. Railguns and plasma cannons ripped into confused Alliance ships, tearing them apart before they could regroup. And then, in the final, devastating stroke, a squad of infiltrators disabled the enemy flagship's AI core, throwing the entire fleet into chaos. Tarek Voss, realizing he had been outmaneuvered, attempted to retreat. But there was nowhere to run. One by one, the Alliance ships fell. And by the time the battle ended, it was over. The last major Alliance fleet in the sector had been annihilated. The end of the war? The destruction of the Lifeblood Corridor and the obliteration of the final Alliance battle fleet sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the first time in millennia, the Galactic Alliance was losing a war. Entire sectors rebelled. Governors defected. The once mighty empire that had ruled with an iron fist for centuries was falling apart. But Mercer knew it wasn't over yet. Not until humanity had forced them to surrender. Not until they had won. Ibarra stood beside him, watching the final enemy wreckage drift through the void. They'll never recover from this. Mercer's expression was cold. Then we finish it. The war was coming to an end. But first, humanity had to break the Alliance once and for all. Asterisk. The galaxy was on the brink of collapse. The once invincible Galactic Alliance, now a shadow of its former self, struggled to maintain control. After the loss of the Lifeblood Corridor and the annihilation of their final battle fleet, their military might had crumbled. But they weren't finished. In the darkest corners of their empire, remnants of the old order were plotting, rallying forces, and preparing to make one last stand. The war wasn't over. It was entering its final phase. Humanity's gambit. Admiral Elias Mercer stood in the war room aboard the Resolute, his eyes hard with determination. He knew the Alliance was reeling, but they weren't going to surrender without a devastating counterattack. He had watched their last moves carefully, and now, they were preparing for a massive final push to take back what they had lost. "We've crippled them, but we still haven't broken them," Commander Ser Ibarra said, analyzing the latest intelligence. "They're rallying their fleets in the Arcturus sector. We can't let them regroup." Mercer's gaze turned cold. "No. We hit them first." Governor Evelyn Hahn appeared on the screen, the weight of their situation evident in her tired eyes. "And what if they retaliate? The Alliance has already destroyed 2 of our colonies. They'll burn another if we give them the chance." Mercer leaned forward. "If we let them recover, they'll burn everything we've fought for. No more defenses, no more hiding. This time, we bring the fight to them." Ibarra raised an eyebrow. "You mean?" Mercer nodded grimly. "We go straight for their heart. The core worlds. Their last bastion. The core worlds. The core worlds were the lifeblood of the Galactic Alliance. The heart of their political and military power, the center of their industrial might. It was where their elite forces were stationed, their most advanced technology developed. If humanity could strike at the center of the enemy's empire, they would have no choice but to surrender. But Mercer was fully aware of the risks. The core worlds were heavily fortified. Hundreds of the most advanced warships were stationed there. And yet, the battle had reached a point where the Alliance's desperation would play into humanity's hands. Ibarra ran a finger across the holographic map. "There's no turning back after this, Admiral." Mercer met her gaze. "We're not retreating anymore. It's time to end this." The plan was set in motion. The Resolute and its fleet, bolstered by allies from rebel sectors and now united under humanity's banner, prepared for their most daring assault yet. They would strike directly at Revalin Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Alliance. If they could breach its defenses, it would be over. The assault begins. Mercer's fleet arrived in the Revalin system with ruthless precision. The Alliance had expected them to attack elsewhere, maybe at the vulnerable systems still reeling from previous blows. They hadn't anticipated that humanity would dare to strike at their most secure system. But the Alliance had underestimated their enemy. The fleet dropped out of slipspace and engaged immediately, unleashing their entire arsenal at the Alliance's outer defenses. The Alliance was caught off guard. Revalin Prime's orbital defenses, once considered impenetrable, were systematically dismantled as human ships poured fire onto their shield generators and weapons platforms. Mercer watched the unfolding battle from the Resolute's bridge, his focus unshakable. "Ibarra, now." The plan was simple: disable the defenses, split the enemy's fleet, and then attack the heart of the enemy. And it worked. The Alliance's last line of defense faltered under the onslaught. The key was the false flag operation that had tricked the Alliance into positioning their remaining forces in the wrong quadrant. By the time they realized their mistake, the UTS fleet was already inside their homeworld's orbit. Mercer's flagship led the charge, the Resolute's railguns hammering enemy ships into oblivion. But then, the real threat emerged. The final battle. As the human fleet advanced, the Alliance unleashed their last card, the Apex fleet, a force so powerful it was meant to be used only in the most dire circumstances. Led by Admiral Galzaios, one of the Alliance's finest strategists, the Apex fleet was designed to crush all opposition. Their ships were the most advanced, their weapons devastating, and their shields were impervious to human firepower. Mercer felt the weight of the moment. If the Apex fleet wasn't destroyed, they could turn the tide. "Graves, I need you to launch everything we've got at their flagship," Mercer ordered. "Now's the time to make it count." Colonel Aidan Graves, aboard one of the stealth ships, smirked. "Consider it done." The battle intensified as railgun slugs and plasma bursts collided with the enemy's hulls. The Resolute's shields held under the barrage, but the enemy's Apex flagship was still standing tall. Graves' team made its move. Through the chaos, they slipped past the Apex fleet's defenses, delivering a massive EMP charge into the heart of their flagship's reactor. The explosion that followed was cataclysmic. Admiral Galzaios and his fleet were decimated in an instant. The Alliance crumbles. With the Apex fleet destroyed, the remainder of the Alliance's forces began to break apart. Humanity's fleet surged forward, targeting the Alliance's remaining strongholds, while rebel forces rose up on every world, causing civil unrest and insurrection across the Empire. Revalin Prime, the very seat of the Alliance, fell. Admiral Mercer watched as the last Alliance ships scrambled to escape, only to be hunted down one by one. The Galactic Alliance was no more. The dawn of a new era. With the destruction of Revalin Prime and the total collapse of the Galactic Alliance, humanity had done the unthinkable. They had won. The war that had begun with their near extermination had turned into a stunning victory. Humanity was now the dominant force in the galaxy. Mercer stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring at the wreckage of the once proud Alliance. "We did it," Ibarra said quietly, looking around at the crew who had fought and bled for this moment. Mercer nodded. "We didn't just survive. We broke them." Humanity had reclaimed its place among the stars. The galaxy would never forget how they had stood against impossible odds, and triumphed. And now, the future was theirs. The war was over. And humanity's place in the galaxy had only just begun.